Hello, students. This is part two of the World War II presentation. I'm going to talk to you about the war in the Pacific and some of the major turning points of the war, as well as major generals who served on the Allied side of the war during World War II. The war in the Pacific, there's four aspects here. Rising tension developed between the United States and Japan because of Japanese aggression in East Asia. Japan controlled most of China. So Japan, in the early 1930s, they had a lot of economic problems as well. Remember, we talked about the fact that the Great Depression wasn't only in the United States. It was in Asia, it was in Europe, Africa, South America. So it was a snowball effect. So Japan wanted a lot of resources because Japan is a small chain of islands, a small country, and what they did was they practiced aggression or toughness towards other countries around it, like China, Manchuria. They invaded Manchuria in China in the early 1932. They wanted rubber, they wanted oil, and FDR heard about that in the United States. So he put sanctions on Japan to get them, to keep them from doing that. And of course, Japan didn't listen. So Japan went on a rampage and they colonized and controlled areas around them. That's what countries do when they're aggressive. A second aspect of the war in the Pacific, on December 7th, 1941, Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor without warning. And we know that this was a surprise aerial attack. And there are photographs of this taking place by a Japanese aircraft. So this was a spark, December 7th, 1941, that pushed America into the war, pushed USA into the war. So we got off the sidelines. We can no longer be neutral. And Japan poked a sleeping giant. That sleeping giant is the United States. And after that, Japan declared war on Japan. Excuse me, let me read that again. The United States declared war on Japan, as well as Germany, and as well as Italy. Okay? So the United States declared war. FDR, who was the president at the time, said he hated war, but he said that December 7th, 1941 is a date which will live in infamy or disgrace and will push us into the war. And Germany declared war on the United States. And here are photographs of the USS Shaw exploding. And this picture right here is the USS Arizona. It's memorialized now. It's where 1,200 sailors lost their lives during this Pearl Harbor attack. Excuse me, let me go back here. This is the before picture of the USS Arizona, not the USS Shaw. So I want to make a correction there. Surprise attack angered us. Here are some generals who were very important during the war. You have U.S. General Chester W. Nimitz, and he was the commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet and Pacific Ocean areas. Very important. And he was the one who was a signatory to the surrender terms aboard the USS Missouri in the Tokyo Bay. And he was pivotal in the U.S. being triumphant in the Pacific. So Chester W. Nimitz. This general right here is General Douglas MacArthur. And he led, it says a Japanese invasion of the Philippines that same year drove his forces from the country, but he came back and had a successful operation against the Japanese military in that region. And his troops were forced to evacuate the Philippines, but he said, "I shall return," and General MacArthur's troops came back, and we were victorious. Yay! Okay? And he had problems with Harry Truman later on, but we'll talk more about that later. Here's Dwight Eisenhower. His nickname was Ike. He was also an officer with MacArthur and General Patton. He was a valued commander during the North Africa campaign. Keep in mind that we also fought in North Africa as well as in Europe and the Pacific. And the Axis power of Germany and Italy had a stranglehold on that area, and we wanted to release their grip from there, their fascist grip. And he also was the main Allied commander of the Allied forces during D-Day. So Dwight Eisenhower is synonymous with the D-Day invasion. Always remember that. And he later became a president of the United States. Dwight Eisenhower, also known as Ike. Here's George Marshall. He was also an important commander in the U.S. Army during World War II. And he also helped Western allies in Europe and also the rebuilding of Europe after the war. And the Marshall Plan was named after him because he orchestrated the rebuilding of the European economy after World War II. Also, he was the Secretary of State after the war. Here's General George Patton, known for his aggressive tactics throughout his military career. He was very abrasive, straight to the point, in your face, chewed you out, and he didn't care. He was a hard-nosed man, and he was one of the greatest commanders and leaders of World War II. On this page, I'm going to talk to you about the major turning points of the war. And turning point means an event that causes something to improve or get better or to lead to victory. In order, you have these major turning points. You have the invasion of Poland. Under the leadership of Hitler, Germany invades Poland on September the 9th, 1939, begin fighting in Europe. And also at this time, the Soviet Union invades Poland, as well as other Baltic nations. So at this time, in 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union were allies. But I told you earlier that Germany is going to stab the Soviet Union in the back and invade them. And that's a big mistake. The second major turning point is the Battle of France and the capture of Paris. And it says that Germany invades France and captures the capital city of Paris in 1940. And there's a picture of Hitler standing with two of his generals in front of the Eiffel Tower, laughing it up and having a good old time. So that was when France was a major Allied power that fell to Nazi Germany. The third battle, or third major turning point, was the Battle of Britain. In 1940, Germany bombed the city of London, which is the capital of Great Britain. In Great Britain, the Germans were pushed back, and it became the first Allied victory for the Allied powers. And the British Royal Air Force used radar to push back the German war machine, the Blitzkrieg. Blitzkrieg in German means lightning war, using quick tactics, planes, bombs, quick artillery to fight the enemy where they can't resist, they can't fight back. So the Battle of Britain was the first Allied victory in the war during World War II, where they used radar to detect German aircraft. And there's a picture of a soldier standing on top of a building using binoculars, looking out for German airplanes because they were bombing London. The fourth major turning point was the Lend-Lease Bill. That was a law passed by Congress in March 1941. The United States gave Britain war supplies and old naval ships in return for military bases in Bermuda in the Caribbean. It was a 99-year lease. So that's when the United States was indirectly involved in the war. We weren't directly involved, but we were indirectly involved. Here's the major event here, and it's the Pearl Harbor attack. On December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, Japan bombed the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in a surprise attack and to push the U.S. into World War II. The USS Shaw was destroyed. The USS Arizona was destroyed. It was a surprise attack. Over 1,500 American soldiers died in the surprise attack. This is the first attack on the U.S. I wouldn't say the U.S. mainland, but on American soil. And you know that Pearl Harbor is in Hawaii. The next turning point after that, Germany declares war on the U.S. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Germany declared war on the United States. Hitler knew that what Japan did, he knew that the United States was going to retaliate. Retaliate means to seek revenge or to fight back. Because you have to remember that Japan, Italy, and Germany were allies. And later on, Italy declared war on us, we declared war on them. All right. Next one says, America declares war on the Axis powers. December 8, 1941. President Franklin D. Roosevelt asked Congress for a declaration of war against the Axis power, Japan and Germany. He signs it into law, and America is directly involved in World War II. And if we turn to the Pacific, we have the Battle of Midway. The Midway Islands are between Hawaii and Japan. And I think it's 2,000 miles to the west of Hawaii, and I think the same amount of distance from Japan. So stuck there in the middle of the ocean. The U.S. was victorious over the Japanese Navy at the Midway Islands. This victory was the turning point of the war in the Pacific. The U.S. sunk two, let me change that right here. Change this for a minute, kids. Just bear with me 1 second. There we go. Let me go back here. Sorry about that. The U.S. sunk 4 major aircraft carriers of the Japanese. An aircraft carrier is like a floating naval base for planes to land on. And we turn back to Europe. We have the Battle of Stalingrad. And if you think about the name Stalingrad, it's named after Joseph Stalin. So that was a town in the Soviet Union, in the western part of the Soviet Union, but it was in Eastern Europe. It says Germany invaded the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union defeated Germany in the city of Stalingrad, marking a turning point of the war in Eastern Europe. So they fought for a couple years in the city of Stalingrad. Like 2 million people died. A lot of people died of frostbite. It was a very horrible, horrible turn of events in that city. It was brutal. Battle of Stalingrad. After that, a major turning point was the Normandy invasion, known as D-Day, and that happened on June the 6th, 1944. And that's one of the reasons why, if you go through the town of Bedford, you have the D-Day Memorial, which commemorates the 18 fallen soldiers from the town of Bedford who lost their life at Normandy Beach, Omaha Beach in France, the highest per capita of deaths for a town. During this battle, American Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy. It was called the D-Day Memorial. It was called the D-Day Invasion, which began the liberation of Western Europe. 176,000 American and British troops parachuted from the air there. They landed on the beaches. And FDR knew that there were going to be a lot of casualties, but this was necessary to push back the grip of Nazi Germany under the control of Hitler from Western Europe. Countries like France, Norway, Belgium, Sweden, they were under the yoke of the swastika, those Germans. And the last major event, the atomic bombing of Japan. The U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan, and I'm going to talk more about that later. Thanks for listening. Peace.